Good afternoon and hello, everyone. Welcome to another Flycast Partners webcast. My name is Rich Longo, and I'll be your host for today's presentation on reduce risks and cost with BMC Discovery, presented by Flycast Partners' very own Kyle Hamilton. Kyle is an experienced pre-sales senior solutions engineer with extensive experience in collaborating with clients and IT strategies and been in the IT industry for well over 20 years. He has experience with a variety of IT tools and publishers ranging from IT service management, IT asset management, and IT operations management, and has experience from multiple types of positions in various industries, allowing him to have the bigger picture in mind when helping organizations with their IT needs, all while taking into account ITIL best practice. Before we get started, Kyle, let me introduce Flycast Partners. Flycast Partners offers best-in-class implementation services and training in IT service management, IT asset management, IT operations management, IT security, enterprise service management, and workload automation spaces using ITIL best practices. Our professional services team has well over 5,600 plus professional services engagements, both on-site and remote, which is important to most organizations out there. As an organization, Flycast Partners has over 1,200 regular customers throughout Canada and the United States. I encourage you to always reach out to us at 844-FLYCAST, that's 844-359-2278, or visit our website. We have IT experts standing by Monday through Friday during normal business hours, waiting to answer your questions, to grab you those data sheets, white papers, get you the training you might require, even get you some professional services, remote administration, or depending on the tool, even L1 and L2 support. I encourage you to email us at info@flycastpartners.com as well. We are more than happy to answer any question. If you want to email that to us, we'll get an answer back to you within 5 business days. Without any further delay, I'm going to turn this over to Kyle. Kyle, it's all yours. I've already handed it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to listen to me today. As Rich mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about how you can reduce the risk and exposure of your organization, as well as reduce costs through the use of discovery. We'll be talking about in the context of maybe several different layers. And I'll start really with kind of the most basic that I get from customers really pretty much every day. And this has never changed, is asset management / configuration management / CMDB is always something that every customer aspires to, would like to have a good handle on or get some control over, but it seems like there's always shortcomings, whether it's in the tooling, whether it's just that the data is just spread out and dispersed in 50 different directions and maintained by different groups. So there's no one single place that you can really look to in terms of overall asset management. And so the tools are there and available. And so hopefully through today's presentation, we'll talk about how they're important, where they're important, why they're important, and what kind of things are out there and available to you that hopefully make you aware of some things that you might not have been before, so that you can understand what you have available to use to help you get a grasp on whether it be asset management or whether you're looking to build a CMDB. And let me, before I go any further, take one moment and just address the difference between the two. So you'll hear me talk about assets, and you'll hear customers say, I'm looking to manage assets. And you'll hear customers say, I want to build a CMDB, or I want to manage my configuration items. Underneath all of that, you're really talking about the same thing. It's just a different perspective on the same device or the same application. If you take example of a server that is deployed, in your data center. That server, you spend thousands and thousands of dollars on it and the software and everything, that's on it. And of course, you want to track that from an asset perspective. It's an asset of the company. It has value. You continue to, power it and spend additional money supporting it. So you want to track it. But those things are typically related to what I mentioned, cost. What's the serial number? Where is it? What is it? Who has, ownership of it? Who's in control of it? So that you know where it is, what it is, how much is it worth to you, things of that nature. Does it have warranty? When do we need to replace it? When does support end? Things like that, all the contract and the vendor side. That's typically looking at that server from an asset management perspective. And that could also include things like inventory. How many do I have and where are they located, so that logistically I can move things around and make sure my assets are in the right place at the right time. If I look at that server from a configuration management perspective, from a service management perspective, I'm not really concerned about the purchase price. And I'm not that concerned about details about the contracts or the invoice numbers or the POs and all of those things that asset management is focused on. I'm more concerned about what operating system does it have and how much memory is available and how much free hard drive space does it have remaining. Things like that. Things that I need to know from a CMDB or configuration manager perspective, how to keep that machine running at its optimum performance. And so while we're looking at the same device, the asset manager is looking at that device from a very different perspective than the configuration manager, who's just concerned with keeping it up and running versus how much is it worth on the books, or when does the warranty expire. Now, to that end, the first thing you have to do is you have to understand what you have within your estate. And oftentimes that's the biggest challenge. That's the first major hurdle. Is either it's typically, in multiple spreadsheets, people receive an invoice or they receive some kind of shipping statement that says, you've got these 10 machines, and that's kind of where the tracking stops. And then they get deployed. And then, of course, within the first 48 hours, they've already moved, they've been updated, changed dramatically, and that spreadsheet's already grossly, out of date. And so inevitably, it almost, in all cases, requires some type of automation, some type of tooling to enable you to be able to get a grasp on asset management. My typical advice to customers is, if you're looking to do things without a tool, is if you can stand up from your desk or cube or office and see every device that you have to manage from where you're standing, go right ahead. If you can't see everything when you stand up, then more than likely you're going to need some type of support in terms of automation in order to be able to keep that information up to date and to keep it accurate. Because in most cases, if you can't, especially when it comes to CMDB, and we're talking, CMDB, where we talk about services and making sure it's available and making sure that it's working so that your employees or your customers are able to get and do what they need. That's of critical importance. And so being able to track that operating system version to make sure that it's not exposed to patches and or vulnerabilities and things like that, and it is patched, that's where all the risk comes in. And especially in today's environment where now everything has left the office and it's at home in many cases, or remote sites, and it's on the internet and it's not on your physical network, it becomes much more difficult to know what's out there, number one, and to be able to keep control over it. So part of what you have to do is you have to be able to reliably and on a regular basis be looking at your network so that you know what's connecting. And that involves having a tool that, without deploying any kind of software, can simply scan your network on a regular basis and tell you, here's what you have out there that's on your network, and here's what it is. So you can make decisions about what to do with it. Do you want to manage it? Do you want to isolate it, quarantine it, kick it off, what have you? So a list similar to what you see on the screen in front of us, where I know not just desktops and laptops, but everything. Does somebody have an Xbox connected to my network? How many IP phones on there? How many printers and routers and switches and everything that's out there that's on the network that I would have to deal with, because of course those switches and routers and things like that, those are often more critical in terms of the business, making sure they're running, than the desktops and the laptops are. But that's more frequently than not a big gap in terms of asset management, as they tend to focus on the client devices, the desktops and the laptops, because that's where they're getting, that's where you're getting the support calls. That's where you're, feeling the most heat, hearing the most noise. But it's often those infrastructure devices that can create all of that havoc, and cause you, to get flooded at the service desk. So knowing about all of those things is just as important, and that's a frequent gap. So having some type of a tool that can, scan your network on a regular basis and tell you about the unknown. This is all about knowing what you don't know about. If you've got, some type of endpoint management solution today already in place, more than likely you've got agents installed on those endpoints that give you, the ability to manage them. But frequently, with many customers, I'll say that stops there as they deploy those agents to all those devices and they start to collect information on them, but they forget about all the things that they don't know that are out there. Now they get all the inventory and the regular updates from those agents on all of the machines that they put the agents on, but what about the machines that somebody walks in tomorrow morning with and plugs in from home, or a brand new device that gets plugged in and wasn't here yesterday? And so often that list of unknowns builds over time if you're not routinely and frequently taking or making use of a network scanning tool, so that you could be made aware of those things that maybe weren't authorized. They're not supposed to be there. That shouldn't be plugged in. That shouldn't be on the network, so that you can, again, make decisions as to what to do with those. Now, frequently, you'll then, put an agent on those devices so that you can remote control and patch and do those things, to manage the device going forward. But initially, you need to get a good understanding of what the estate looks like, what you have to deal with, so that you can make those decisions, based on everything and complete assessment of your network, versus just looking at what computers are in an Active Directory and dealing with those. Because again, that's just what you know. It's not what you don't know. Now, and you'll find when it comes to building, or starting an asset management project or building a CMDB, you are typically not going to find a single solution that's going to cover your asset management needs from end to end, meaning something that's going to collect all the information on your switches and routers and your desktops and your IP phones and your tablets and your phones and everything. Now, with the agentless scans, like I've talked about, and some of the information you see here, that lets you know that it's out there, but there's a lot more detail that you may need. What version of the operating system, what type of phone or firmware is it running, and things like that. A lot of additional details. So you need to be able to, at some point, from a configuration management perspective, drill in a little bit deeper, so that you can understand how that device is configured and what versions of software it's running, and this and that. this is where you get into, managing the risk, is making sure that, number one, are they running software that they shouldn't be? Should be controlling that and making sure that nothing's installed and the versions are up to date and those applications are patched. And that takes being able to discover what's currently installed in the current version. So that, again, you can make decisions as to what to do. Do we need to update it? Do we need to quarantine this device? Do we need to lock it down in some way so that you can mitigate those exposures and those gaps and those risks, whether it's in the software or whether that's in the patches that it may be, that device may be missing. And this is where vast majority of risk comes in, is in not knowing or not being able to plug those gaps and those holes in the vulnerabilities in those remote devices that are out roaming around, potentially with access to, corporate network, email, data, either access to it or even held on the device. And so making sure that you understand what applications they're running, what versions they have, and making sure those things are up to date and patched and there's no vulnerabilities or exposure there is of critical importance. So being able to not just know what's out there, but again, being able to then look in detail and see, how is it configured? Is it configured properly? Is it the way that we expect it to be, so that you can be alerted if the firewall's turned off instead of on, or they installed some application that's not approved, so that you can mitigate those risks. But it takes the discovery capability and to be able to do this on a repetitive basis, because again, these things are changing. I look at this machine right now, and in 5 minutes they could go, and if they have the ability to go and download a new version, install some new application, make changes, and even this information can become out of date very quickly if it's not refreshed on a regular basis. Now, when you look at asset management or discovery in general, whether it be discovery of individual devices, or we'll talk in just a moment about discovery of some additional data, it's not just in and of itself asset management, but it's also shoring up every other one of your IT service management processes. So when you think about the ability to effectively troubleshoot with customers on the phone, how much easier is it when you know that they're using Adobe Acrobat Reader 1.9 or 9.1, and you know what kind of operating system they have, and you know how their machine's configured, versus either having to ask them for details that they probably don't know and hard to find, or simply not knowing and just kind of stabbing in the dark. So just being able to provide, aside from asset management, being able to provide this kind of detail to the service desk, so that when customers are on the phone and they have reporting problems and issues, that this kind of detail is available to them, so that they have some subject matter expertise that they might not have had otherwise. Even if they can't necessarily do anything about it, just having the detail can shore up that troubleshooting process. When you're trying to, if anybody's doing problem management and you're trying to do root cause analysis, figure out why something happened, that depends on not only the configuration data of the individual devices, knowing what hardware and software is on machine A or machine B, but in addition to that, being able to provide some detail about how are all those devices connected, how are they communicating, or are they dependent upon one another, so that I can use in this type of information subject matter expertise that I can draw upon, in this case, through BMC Discovery. So the ability to go out and collect everything that you see on the screen in front of you here, in terms of not just the SQL databases and the hosts and the Azure virtual machines, but what service is running on which application and which IP addresses are being shared in this IP pool and things of that nature, which connections are being distributed amongst the different geographies, and being able to have this level of detail collected for you on a fully automated basis, so that not only can you provide that to problem management, so if they're trying to analyze root cause, being able to look at the different parts of the infrastructure and how things are related to make that determination. But even more importantly is when you look at how do you properly analyze change impacts and assess your changes without this kind of information, to know that if I take a particular service down or a particular server is impacted, how does that affect the business? What other applications, what other devices that lie downstream may be impacted? And in many cases, this type of information you're looking at here it's available, but it's typically segmented. So you'll have a SQL administrator who understands part of this map, and you'll have an application developer that understands another part of this map, and you'll have some other business users that understand a completely different side. But in order to understand everything, you have to get everybody together in a conference room, and that's to be mind share, versus being able to provide that same level of detail across the board to everybody, so that whether they're troubleshooting or doing root cause or they're doing a change analysis, the same level of expertise is available, whether they're a network engineer or somebody working the frontline support desk, if that information is important. And that goes on to how do you build a knowledge base effectively if you don't know what kind of software is in use and what kind of hardware and models and things like that are your employees using. So being able to discover some basic details about what kind of assets you have and where are they and what's in use really shores up and supports every IT service management process you can think of. That goes on. How do you build service level agreements and commit to resolving and responding to customer issues if you don't know what applications you're supporting and what versions, and are they running on sufficient hardware? Do they have the resources they need? Those basic types of things. So in a lot of cases, without having a good grasp on your assets, without having a good discovery capability or solution, you're dramatically undercutting your ability to troubleshoot, your ability to analyze, your ability to root cause analyze, and things like that, on and on and on across the board. Things like monitoring. In many cases, how do you set up the monitoring and all the alerts that you need if you don't know for sure where everything is and how many are actually out there and what they are? So it all comes back to being able to have an effective discovery solution, so that all of those other processes, once you've collected that core information, here's what I have, maybe even here's how it's connected, so that I can analyze those dependencies and relationships, and be able to get to a point where you can easily look to see what devices support my payroll, what devices provide my email service. Because when I, as a support engineer, and this even goes again back to the use of this discovered data, you have monitoring tools that'll send out alerts, and they'll say this server ABC is not responding, or this service has just gone down on this device. But what I really care about is what is that? How does that impact the business? What I really want to see is, that page or text message or whatever it may be that says payroll's down. Now it has some business context and some meaning to it versus just an IP address and a host name. And it's being able to take all that discovered data, which is going to give you all these, just a list of host names, right? You got this host and it's this IP address and it's this processor, this operating system. But then by building that CMDB on top of that discovered data, that's what allows you to move from a server name like this, which may have absolutely no meaning to anybody, to being able to say your corporate accounting system's affected, which has business context to it. You can prioritize that. I can prioritize payroll over, a broken pipe in the bathroom. But if I'm just looking at device names and IP addresses and notifications from monitoring tools, a lot of times that that business context gets lost. And so being able to take all that discovered information, put it into a CMDB, whether that be in your ITSM tool or something external, hopefully together, and so that you can leverage the assets when you're creating those incidents and when you're submitting the change requests and people have to approve and analyze. And that's when you want to make all this type of information available, especially when that big change is getting ready to get implemented. And, I, as the CIO, are being asked to, approve this because of its scale or its, breadth. But I have no clue of what the business impact may be, other than what somebody else tells me. So by having the ability to put some business context, on top of that discovered data, just gives you that much more information so that when the Apache web server goes down, and that's not all it tells me that corporate accounting system's going to be impacted, or you're not going to be able to cut payroll checks this weekend because of this outage. That allows me to prioritize those issues and those outages more effectively than if I'm just getting, random monitored alerts. And I want to stop for just a minute because I know we're right at the bottom of the hour. Rich, do we have any questions from anybody up to this point?
We don't have any questions as of yet, Kyle. Sorry to interrupt there. And so, folks, if you have your questions, please type them in. Kyle is more than happy to answer all your questions live during today's presentation. As you can see, he's shown multiple things and a couple different tools here. So he has a great breadth of knowledge and can definitely assist you with any questions that you might have, and maybe even help you determine what is going to be the right fit for you just by asking specific questions. So go ahead and type those questions in there, and Kyle's more than happy to answer them for you.
Thank you, Rich. So in talking, going back and talking a little bit more about the reasons for discovery, this also supports a lot of different business initiatives. One of the biggest ones that I deal with now is disaster recovery. With businesses that are trying to make sure that they're prepared in case something goes wrong, site has a problem. How do we, restore services or fail over to a secondary site? And how do we do that if I don't know what server ABC or server XYZ is connected to or related to or communicating with? And so again, things like the BMC Discovery tool that I can simply point at my infrastructure and have it, spit back results within hours, so that I now can see, okay, this is what I need to recreate in my disaster recovery plan. When we need to fail over, I need to make sure we have these elements replicated in that secondary site or that failover site or that failover data center. And again, it just saves, this is all about converting, what's in everybody's heads again, this is typically contained within most environments. It's just that it requires you to talk to a lot of people, or it requires you to talk to that one person that's been around for like 38 years and has all this, he or she has all this buried in their head. This gives you the opportunity not only to automate that, because of course, even in those scenarios where you have that brain trust of information, they're not always aware of all the updates and the changes that are occurring. It's the velocity of change that makes managing this next to impossible without tooling. The number of devices, that's one thing, but if you just had 5,000 machines and they put them out there and they remain static in the same place and they never updated, that would still be relatively easy. But as I mentioned, typically once you hand somebody a laptop, and they walk away within the first 48 hours, whatever information you're tracking on that laptop or you had about it, typically 25% of it's already incorrect within the first 48 hours. It's already been modified. And so if you're not keeping up with that on a regular basis, even the subject matter experts aren't going to know about the latest network switch or the latest router that was put in place that may impact their ability to assess a change. And so this does, provide you with a backup resource that doesn't necessarily rely on memory or expertise, but actually shows you what the reality is at this point, so that when you're evaluating changes, you're, trying to assess, potential impact, that you're relying on the most up-to-date data, because the Murphy's Law will tell you that if you have a spreadsheet of information and it's 98% accurate, and you go to rely on it to make some decision, you're going to end up relying on the 2% of information that's in that spreadsheet that was out of date or inaccurate. And so that's where they say, if you're going to you're going to embark upon the project of building a CMDB or managing assets, go into it with the idea that you're looking for 99% plus accuracy. Otherwise, don't track it, because it will inevitably fall to that 2 or 3% that you're out of sync on when it comes time to make that critical business decision. And they say typically it's better off not having it at all than looking at it, making a bad decision because the information was out of date. And to that point, in terms of just overall best practice and process, for those that are thinking about, they talk about discovery, setting up a discovery solution, or you want to start managing assets better, you want to build a CMDB because you want to shore up those other processes. You certainly need to think about, what kind of change management process you have currently. The last thing you want to do is to start collecting data and discovering data and populating a CMDB or managing it in any way if you don't have a fairly good, fairly rigid change management process. Doesn't have to be complex. Doesn't have to be anything detailed. You don't have to have a lot of approvals, and you don't have to have CAB meetings and things like that if you don't need those. But you need to be recording and documenting every single update that occurs to everything you put in that asset database or in that CMDB.
And we have a couple questions, Kyle, if you're open to it.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
All right, the first one comes from Stanley, and Stanley asks, is the discovery agent an agent-based or agentless based?
BMC Discovery, this one we're looking at here, this is 100% agentless. There are no agents. Now, it is focused on the infrastructure. It's focused on your data center. So it's not designed for desktops, laptops, your end user devices, because it's not looking for desktop software. It's looking for data center software and things like that. Now, the other view that I showed earlier, the both the agentless discovery that I talked about here that finds you routers and switches, as well as the agentless that we talked about that gives you all the details, so hardware, software. That is agent based. So in order to get certain information, you have to have an agent, but we don't need an agent to tell you, that it's out there, that it's running this operating system, that it has this amount of memory and this, configuration. It's only if I need to remote control it, if I need to patch it, if I need to uninstall or update software, do I actually need to put an agent on it. Otherwise, you can typically discover everything you need to on a device without an agent. The only thing the agent's going to do for you is give you those added management capabilities.
Okay, our next question is from Steve. He wants to know, what is the licensing model for that product?
Okay, so you said that product, and I talked about two. I'll give you both. So with client management, which is this one's the one that's focused specifically on your desktops and laptops. That's why they both are kind of designed to work in concert. Is this client management discovery? This is your front of house. This is the user facing discovery. I want to know what my users are using, what they're booting up every day and using for their job. The agents that I deploy, that's how this is licensed. So now I can go through and discover, you saw in here, I discover all kinds of devices, IP phones, switches, routers. You're not licensing those. I don't care if you discover 5,000 switches because you're not managing switches, just the agents. So if you have 500 Windows machines, and by the way, there's agents for Windows, Linux, and Macs. So say you have 500 endpoints you want to manage, it'd be 500 licenses. You may discover 6,000 devices with switches and printers and things, but you're only purchasing 500 licenses because that's all you're managing. Now on the discovery, BMC discovery, because this is a little more esoteric and it goes out and discovers everything, including like you see, or like we saw before, AWS environments, right? So even cloud-based environments that aren't within your data center. So this has the ability not only to scan what's on your network, but what's in somebody else's. This is licensed based on the number of operating, let me do this slowly, server operating system instances. So if you have, say, 50 servers, physical and virtual, then it's 50 licenses of BMC Discovery. Again, they don't care what else you're discovering because in most cases they realize that the whole reason you're looking for the tool in the first place is you don't know what's out there, so you can't give the numbers to get the licensing. So they just boiled it down and said, tell us how many servers you have, and we can extrapolate the size environment you have essentially based on the number of servers. So if you got 50 servers, they're going to license, based on 50. If you got 200, 100 physical, 100 virtual, 200 licenses, and what you discover is irregardless. I hope that answers.
Okay, and now we have a couple more questions. The next question, this one comes from Adam. Adam wants to know, when used with or on employee-owned devices, are there any tools or custom policies to protect user privacy?
There's not, I won't say there's any custom tools for user privacy. I mean, essentially, by virtue of the fact that in most cases when you're installing an agent, like any kind of management agent on a laptop or desktop, that agent, is typically being installed with at least local administrator, if not, a domain admin, so you can just use one set of credentials across everybody, to give you access to be able to open up that remote control session or install that software or patch. Now you might have, you might set it so that you need permission for remote control and things like that. But when it comes to, your ability then to, transfer a file off of that hard drive or do anything to that device. Given that you're, a local admin, there's nothing at that point that's going to stop you or prohibit you from, taking whatever action you need to on the device. So I'd say when it comes to, things like PII or PHI information that might be on a machine, you can now. Once that information is discovered, you can choose to mask that data, right? So there may be information that you're pulling off of a machine that does involve PII or PHI, and you don't want it accessible, you don't want it displayed. So you can certainly encrypt those fields so that when somebody's looking, if I go in and look at, let's just click on Azure here. You can see it'll pull up some information. And if I drill down into a particular, let me just do this. Let me open up a particular server. Let me just look up SQL box. So if I pull up a SQL server, you'll see down below, it's going to give me some specifics on this individual, that I've discovered for this SQL server. What databases does it have on it, where are they located, and things like that. And I can drill down, into those elements as well, right? And see details, further details. All of that information is being collected. I can query that information because I've got administrative access and administrative rights. But if there was a piece of information, a field, any one of these that contained PHI or some kind of confidential or confidential information, I can just set that field to mask so that instead of showing me the results, it just shows me a set of asterisks. And only maybe certain admins or certain individuals, can display or look at the results of those fields, or you may set it so that nobody can. It can be discovered, but you can suppress it from view, I guess is the short.
Next question. Please clarify, if I want to do software asset management or need to know all the software installed in the servers, do I need to install an agent? Is this the proper tool to do software asset management?
Great question. And no, BMC Discovery is not going to be your tool for software asset management. That is going to require an agent. And the difference or the key is it doesn't require an agent to discover what software is on a device. Okay, I don't need an agent to get this detail right here. But I do need an agent if I want to know or track software licensing or track utilization. Have they used that software in like the last 60 days or 90 days or things like that? So when it comes to being able to look at a dashboard or something like Microsoft Office, where I want to see how many do I own, how many are installed, how many do I have available, as well as how many are actually in use. How many actually I know how many I've deployed, but how many are actually being utilized on a regular basis, so I might be able to reclaim those. This piece is going to take the agent. We can't monitor, that software ongoing, whereas that initial inventory is just a snapshot. It just tells us here's what it has, here's what it looks like right now. But if you're going to do software license management, it's going to require an agent, because that's going to give you the ongoing ability not only to track utilization, but also then to be able to say, well, if you're not using it, then maybe I want to go in and lock you down so you can't use it, or uninstall it from your device automatically if you haven't used it in 60 days. So that's where the agent can help, is it can provide some automation where I can set some rules to say, if they have Microsoft Office and they haven't used it in 90 days, uninstall it so I have that license back in my pool and I can deploy it to somebody else.
That's all our questions for the moment. And actually, that takes us up to the end. Folks, if you have any additional questions, go ahead and reach out to us at 844-FLYCAST. That's 844-359-2278. Or chat with us Monday through Friday during regular business hours. Those guys are standing by just for you. They'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you might have. You can email us at info@flycastpartners.com. With that being said, I'm going to say thank you for your time, folks. And Kyle, great presentation. Thank you so much for taking all the questions as well.
Happy to do it, and I appreciate everybody's time and wish everybody a great day.
Until our next presentation, folks, stay safe out there.